Okay, so let's do a little time traveling. Imagine you're back in the first few centuries of Christianity. You'd see believers, you'd find communities, but you know what you wouldn't find? A single person celebrating Christmas on December 25th. Why? Because, believe it or not, for early Christians, celebrating birthdays was kind of seen as a pagan thing. So, how on earth did we get from there to here?
Right? How did this one specific day, a date that is literally nowhere in the Bible, become this massive global phenomenon? Today we're going to break down what might just be the greatest rebranding campaign in all of human history. It's a wild story where faith, politics, and the stars all collide.
All right, so where do we even begin our investigation? Well, the first clue is a huge contradiction, and it's hiding in plain sight, right inside the biblical account itself.
So let's look at this. On one hand, the Gospel of Luke paints this serene picture of shepherds just hanging out in the fields with their flocks at night. But on the other hand, you have the actual geography of Bethlehem. In December, it's cold. We're talking rainy, sometimes even snowy. There's just no way shepherds would have their valuable flocks out in the open. They would have been sheltered for the winter.
And it's that simple fact that's led a ton of scholars to agree that a much more likely time of year for the birth would have been the fall, probably September or October. Agriculturally, it just makes way more sense. But that only deepens the mystery, right? If it probably wasn't December, then why in the world was December 25th chosen? Well, the answer isn't really about theology, it's about the politics of a giant empire.
So for our next clue, we need to fast forward a bit to the 4th century Roman Empire. This was a place going through a massive, and I mean massive, religious and cultural change.
See, before Christianity became the dominant force, Romans were all about a festival called Saturnalia. For a whole week in late December, everything was turned upside down. Businesses shut down, social norms were ignored. It was a week-long party of feasting, gift-giving, and general chaos. It was the biggest event of the year, period.
And what happened the day after that huge party ended? Another major festival. This one was for Sol Invictus, or the unconquered sun. And guess what day it was celebrated on? Yep, December 25th, to mark the birthday of the sun god. So you've got a whole population that is already hardwired to party straight through this exact date.
So now imagine you're Emperor Constantine. You've just converted to this new faith, Christianity, and you have a huge problem. How do you get an entire empire that loves its winter festivals to just stop? Well, you don't. You can't just cancel the biggest party of the year. The solution was an absolute stroke of political genius. If you can't beat them, join them. Don't fight the culture, co-opt it. Christianize the dates they already love.
What the early church did was essentially give Roman culture a software update. It was like saying, hey, you can keep your holiday schedule. You can keep the feasts. You can keep the good vibes. We're just changing the reason why you're celebrating. By putting Christ's birth right on top of the sun god's birth, they made it incredibly easy for people to adopt the new beliefs without having to give up their cherished old habits.
But you know what? Politics isn't the whole story here. There's another much more profound reason this date was so perfect, and it has to do with the rhythm of the planet itself.
December 25th falls right around the winter solstice, the single shortest, darkest day of the entire year. And for ancient people who lived and died by the seasons, this moment was a huge deal. It was a time filled with a bit of fear, but also a ton of hope.
The solstice was the turning point. It's the moment the sun seems to stand still before it starts its slow journey back, promising that longer days are coming, that life is returning. It was, quite literally, the moment that light began to win the fight against darkness.
And this natural metaphor was just too powerful for the early church to ignore. So you've got Jesus, who is often called the light of the world, and you've got the solstice, the day the actual light starts to return to the world. It was a perfect match. By aligning the two, the Christian message became tied to a universal truth of nature. It was an absolute masterclass in symbolic marketing.
But here's the thing. The story of December 25th doesn't just stop in ancient Rome. Not even close. This holiday has been constantly tweaked, remixed, and even outright banned over the centuries. Seriously, this tradition has never stood still. After it's established in the 4th century, you jump forward to the 1600s, and the Puritans are actually banning Christmas because they thought it was just a pagan party with a Christian label. And that jolly, red-suited Santa Claus we all know, that image was pretty much cemented for good by a Coca-Cola ad campaign in 1931.
And it keeps going. The Christmas tree, it has absolutely no roots in the Bible. It actually comes from an old Germanic tradition of bringing evergreens inside to ward off evil spirits during the dark winter. It just goes to show you, history is the ultimate recycler. So, after all of this, what's the takeaway? The evidence is pretty overwhelming that December 25th is not the actual historical birthday. But maybe that doesn't really matter. Maybe its power doesn't come from being a biological fact, but from what it represents. It's more of a spiritual birthday.
Because what this date really taps into is something deep inside all of us. It's that universal human need for a little light, for a reason to celebrate, for a glimmer of hope right when things are at their coldest and darkest. It's a powerful reminder that even in the dead of winter, renewal is always on its way.
So when you put it all together, the biblical contradictions, the Roman politics, the astronomy of the solstice, it leaves you with this one fascinating question. Is the story of December 25th about pure faith, or is it about incredibly clever politics? The real brilliance might just be that it's a perfect fusion of both.